Hey, good morning. Going to continue on with the neurodevelopment 5-part series. Let me just wanted to say good morning, and I'll zoom in. Hopefully, you are seeing the slides for our series. But George Hersh. The purpose of this presentation is understanding your child's developmental processes. So really want to get into understanding those processes. A little bit about me, George Hersh. I'm a husband, father, grandfather, really dyslexic, ADHD individual that have spent the last 30 years really delving into the psychology, the neuroscience, the personal side of dyslexia and ADHD. So, and I've dedicated the last 30 years of my life discovering tools, strategies, resources that create extraordinary results and in incredible levels of personal performance improvement. So, keep going. And I've directly impacted the lives of thousands with my work in leadership, peak performance, and self-improvement neural pathways. So what we're going to cover today is perception issues. How we perceive things are incredible. So it comes down to these 10 mental processes. So we have 10 neurological processes we all use to learn, and I'd like to cover those today. It's kind of wrapping up what we've already built, all the foundation of neurogenesis and how your brain builds all these synaptic networks. And I want to cover the actual processes we all use. And so when you start talking about perception, though, perception is reality. What you can perceive, you can believe. That is one option, or is it what you believe you perceive? So I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but there's a lot of people that just flip these around. And so, but perception is our looking glass. What we kind of perceive through our eyes and through the way we process information makes a big difference. So we're going to talk about processes, and we're going to talk about perception. And your brain has to process information so that you can perceive that information and then make an analogy of it. So these 10 neurological processes that we all use to learn. Focus is number one, cross pattern, motor match, mental picture, and tracking. So that's the first 5. I'll let me go over some of those. I would tell you that 80% at least of the parents that I've seen or talked to, done evals on or assessments on, think their child has a focus issue, and yet that's really not the underlying issue. They can focus on a video game, or they can focus on a athletic event that they like. If they're excited about it, they can focus on it. And so there's a real big misperception of what it means to focus. And usually when I start off a lecture or a talk, I usually ask people how many people took a class on focusing. Most people just got told to try harder, or were accused of not trying hard enough when their brain was working really hard at trying to focus on the issue. And so so cross pattern, getting both sides of the mind to work together, so the body and the mind working together. Cross pattern functions can be as simple as doing jumping jacks, but it's really gets in the underlying your brain sharing information, especially if you have a dominant brain and you think you're an analytical thinker, you're not very creative. You know, one side of your brain kind of takes control of everything. And so again, this gets back to what we perceive. There's billions of bits of information being brought in through your eyes, your senses, your touch, your smell, and your brain is having to process all that. And then eventually kind of the two hemispheres of your brain are being kind of controlled by the corpus callosum. You know, neuroscience scientists have known this for years, and then it's kind of controlling what you're thinking about, what's coming up, what's bubbling up in your brain, and then what's working in an automatic sense. So you have this automatic processes that are just taking care of your daily functions. And then same thing, kind of motor match. It's kind of matching a physical movement with an auditory cue. So kind of walking, talking, chewing bubble gum at the same time, being able to do sports, being able to coordinate an auditory cue with a physical movement. Mental picture working, a lot of people call this working memory. Your long-term memory, short-term memory, thinking in pictures, but it's really about visualizing things. And a lot of people that struggle, like myself, with dyslexia didn't really understand that mental picture, because you know, a lot of dyslexics see in 3D, but they don't like words. They don't like letters. They don't see the letters. They don't see the letters forming a word very well because their brain isn't trained to that. They envision the 3D world really well, but there is a disconnect, a mental disconnect in those, and it's really those neuron connections in the processing. But that all these can be developed. I mean, that's the one thing that's great is your working memory can be really talked about. And then tracking. One can be your eyes. Can they follow, you know, if you have weak eye muscles, can they track things? Can you stay on track while you're reading a book? Or a lot of people misunderstand dyslexia when they think that until I learned about content reading and understood that your brain and your eyes, if you've ever taken a speed reading class, which I've taken many reading classes and programs and speed reading programs, and understand that your eyes are taking in all this information simultaneously. Everything on the page is flooding into your brain, and then you have to focus on those individual letters that make up words. That may also why people refer to programs that are multi-sensory programs, which in theory you're always using all your senses. It's just how, you know, it's the repetitive nature of those programs that always do something. And if you fall in line with almost all the quote-unquote professionals, dyslexics, I'll just break the harsh news to you. If you've dealt with anybody with dyslexia, ADHD, they're going to tell you it's repetition, which is school systems in general are going to say repetition and emotional involvement. And they're going to tell you, instead of seeing a sight word 2 or 3 times like a neurotypical person is, they need to see it 40, 50, 60, maybe 100 times and kind of be beaten into somebody. And I don't mean physically, I just mean it's the redundancy of the process that they all believe in. And so if you can put up with it and do it a lot, which I've practices those modalities, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And you know, I can show you a lot simpler way to learn, and you don't have to make my mistakes of like I say, going through all the I don't want to say, I just keep using it quote unquote, because I mean, there's so many people that talk about scientific based this or scientific based that. The way people learn has been scientifically proven for years. And, you know, but each individual program that's out there that claims to have all this backing really doesn't have a third party, you know, really a study or a white paper on it. I mean, most any kind of study or opinion on something or the scientifically based, you know, somebody can scientifically prove about anything if they use enough different processes, basically, and they find a way to prove it, and they find you know, the study. You know, I think I'm a little bit jaded because I watch these people around here looking for the right candidates to test products on. So if you have this problem, come in, they want to try a new drug on you, and they're usually funded by pharmaceutical companies or somebody that's got some skin in the game, because the government doesn't fund that many processes other than like college research process, and then it's to prove a thesis for an individual, and that those hardly ever see the light of day in the mass population. So sorry to get off on a little bit of a segue, but let me talk about the other 5. So figure, ground, direction, position in space, size, and shape. So figure, ground is probably the #1 issue when your child has, say, ADHD. So it's looking at a figure and blocking out the ground. It's looking at a letter and blocking out or looking at a word really and blocking out all the other words on the page. It could singularly take it to a letter if you want to do it, but in a microsecond, can you pick up that word, pull it together, and block everything else out? When your brain gets overwhelmed, it kind of shuts down and pulls back. You might have heard me talk about this, but it really is interesting to me. When your brain does get overwhelmed, it just pulls back, gets confused, and then everybody kind of loses in that situation. So I can unfortunately talk about each one of these for hours on end, but don't have time to try to keep this short to get into every one of these in detail. I may follow up with something for everybody. So direction is, you know, a discrimination type issue. So understanding right from left, up and down, north, south, east, and west. And it can be each one of those. Ladder reversal can be an issue, but a lot of times that's an eye issue and a tracking issue as much as a directional issue. Or like I said earlier about content reading, your eyes are racing ahead to find out the meaning of one word, and then they're scanning back to the back of where the word that they had struggled with, and so that's when they start seeing especially small words backwards. But directional discrimination can be a lot of different things, and understanding direction, like following directions or tracking a number of things at the same time. When you have those two in combination, people seem to be disorganized and lost in things. So it can be really critical to how people kind of perceive things. And then position in space gets into understanding relationships. So there's a multitude of these. So understanding where they fit in the world, understanding their relationship with their body and the surrounding areas, understanding each individual relationship, whether it's the family unit, school, their friends, how they fit into a company, how they can understand that, and how they can pick up on like social cues. And if you get a number of these processes kind of out of whack, it's when people just seem disinterested or missing a cue. I can use a lot of analogies in the dating world or even marriages when they don't understand what's going on and the meaning behind it on a subconscious level. they are kind of missing the mark. So it's really, though, kind of in depth in like understanding the roles of that relationship that I'm playing, whether I'm the leader or whether I'm the workhorse behind it, and really deeply understanding it. And it's really these last, this one, size and shape, I always called these kind of the big three. We see these over and over again. I've tested lots of people that have done other programs, and they never deal with them. They don't, none of them, they always seem to raise the bar with everything else, but they don't work on these. Size is people that say overreact or underreact or have time components, mismanage things, don't understand the importance of something. So your brain is the magnitude, the size, the physical nature of the size of it, or the importance of it. So the critical importance of that information really matters, and their brain isn't picking it up. It's such a critical thing. It creates anxiety because you have two decisions to make, and you can't pick between those two decisions or three decisions or however many choices. That's why people don't like more than three choices or two choices, even if they can get away with it. And when you give them two choices, they're stressed. When you give them three, they feel like there's actually more comfort level. They got more choices. But you give them 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that's why everybody tries to narrow things down into a singular thing so that you can make a decision. And then shape is understanding math concepts, and really it gets down to cause and effect, understanding the cause and effect relationship to what they do and how they do it. Gets down to the shape of things, trying to get some form to all these things. So size, shape, meaning the shape of reality to them, the perception that they're coming up with. And so that's kind of a quick rendition. I know I've taken longer than I wanted, but it's kind of a quick run through of these 10 neurological processes that we all use. So let me just ask you a question. Is your child behind their peers? You might be saying no, but I fear it's coming. Or you may think your child can do more. I literally just signed up a girl the other day that's, a BC student, but her grandmother's talking about how hard she has to work to stay in that BC level and just wants to perform at a higher level. That is typical for us to deal with anybody that wants to perform at a higher level than they already are. But you may be, they may be less than a year behind. Like I say, they may be just in that C level, D level range, or they may be more than a year. We deal with a lot of kids that are more than a year behind, or they could be, or maybe they're even 2 years behind. That starts failing, pretty hard in the school systems with a lot of IEPs. I know that they're just trying to get people through. I would say 5, 6 months ago, I tested a 17-year-old that was reading at the 4th grade level. He's graduating from high school. He was spelling at the 4th grade level, and his dad's talking about he's going to college. If he makes it a year, he'll be lucky. He may make it with a lot of help. But it's going to be a tough time until he catches up, and it's really about those weak processing areas that need to be strengthened. So what do we cover today? The perception issues that everybody has, how we perceive and believe things, or how we can believe and then perceive things. So we just have to really think about how it's our perception, it's our child's perception, it's that individual, it's the spouse's perception of what's going on, and it's how they're processing information. And your brain always is looking out for you. Remember that all the time. Your brain is always looking out for you. And then went over the 10 mental processes that we all use to learn. These are just the automatic things that we all use to learn. So additional things. Remember, no two individuals are the same. There are no two brains alike. There's connectivity issues. That's the only thing that separates people, is the more dense, the the maceration in your brain. And remember, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental delay. It is 2 to 5 years behind another individual. That's why cognitive skills, behavior modification are really important. You read anything, any recommendations on even if your child's on medication, it's behavior modification for the parents and the child, and cognitive skills training, because school systems don't deal with cognitive skills in a way that someone like us, our program, deals with cognitive skills. They're more interested in teaching your child how to read, spell, write, do math, and kind of the fundamental things, not the real core. I call them the footings, the behind, underneath the foundation, or the footings in a building. Sorry, my construction background's coming out, but you got to get those footings solid and really kind of work on that. I use the analogy sharpen the mind, sharpen your mind, or sharpen the mind, mainly because there's like a famous quote from Abraham Lincoln that if he had 5 minutes to cut a tree, he'd sharpen the axe for 4 minutes and use it to cut the tree down quicker. So it's the same kind of theory, is let's sharpen the mind where they're at. And so the way we think is obvious. You can actually just watch your child. They're telling you how they're thinking. If they're getting overwhelmed, then they're upset, they're throwing a fit. If they're ever pushing back and they're struggling, that there's something wrong. You may say, well, that's the way everybody learns. It is, but when people get overwhelmed, you have to find a way to break it down. So if there's anything you get out of this, is just find a way to break it down, simplify it for them. But that's an adult's responsibility to break it down for their child. The child's not going to be able to figure it out all the time. And they will eventually if you keep showing them, hey, let's just take a breath and slow it down and try not to think you got to keep up with everybody else. Because what we do is we see the person that's doing it the easiest, and we expect us to do it the same as them, and yet that's not the way the world works, the way the brain works. So neuroscience helps us understand these underlying symptoms. If you really get down into it, there's ways to understand those things. So, and then, here's some of my final thoughts. So you have to build up those skills, as I was touched on earlier. You have to build up those skills, those cognitive skills. And you may have seen it, it's like 80% of the issues in education are cognitive skills delays. And it's becoming more and more prevalent to realize that that's the backbone of everything. So you want to relieve the stress. You want to relieve any stress that your child's having. You as an adult wouldn't put up with the stress that kids have to put up with. A lot of times kids are putting up with way more stress than adults. And so then incorporating the mind and the body together, that's the fastest way to get the mind to improve, is to incorporate the body and physically get people connected. Especially if your child, chances are, if they're struggling in school, then they're a kinesthetic learner. They're a physical learner. They like to touch and be involved in the process. So what's the next steps? You've gone through this series. I'm going to give you a free PDF that the 10 neurological, there'll be a link somewhere probably in the email that I sent you, or I'll have it on the page. We'll have the links to get this. We'll also have links. You could sign up. I have a baseline assessment. It's $47 right now. I dropped it down. It's the same baseline assessment. You do have to send it in to me, and I'll send you a report back. So there's a little work on both parts of us. But it'll test these 10 neurological processes, and you'll get an understanding of their strengths and weaknesses, along with some other stuff about reading and spelling and math and where they're at. And so we'll test some really good things, or evaluate and assess those things. But it's a simple process, and I want to get it out to as many people as possible. I charge $250 to do this at my office in Kansas City. So, I know you're doing a lot of work. So at one point we were selling for $97, but I've really kind of just said, how can I get people to make some effort, take some effort to do something? We've got thousands of people signing up for things, and yet people don't take the necessary steps and invest in their child to do it. And then ultimately, if you want to enroll in our program, 6 months minimum to a year to go through the process, and you're working for 30 to 45 minutes a day with your child, depending on how many days you work with them. But they're simple exercises, and then they build on themselves and get into more and more complex exercises as the program goes on. So I hope you enjoyed this series. I'll finish up, and hopefully you've, again, got some great information. And any questions, you can always email me. I'll have that on the link. And have a blessed day.